My name is Claire Whitmore and I am 62 years old. But the story I'm about to tell you began when I was 27, sitting in the marble-lined conference room of my grandmother's Houston estate, waiting to hear her last will and testament. "You're not even truly a Whitmore," my father spat across the table, his voice echoing off the polished oak. The air went still, and I felt every pair of eyes in that room land on me. In that moment, I wasn't just a grieving granddaughter. I was being accused of being an intruder in my own family. Before I continue, write your country name in the comments. I love knowing where my listeners are from. At 27, I thought my biggest challenge was coping with the loss of my grandmother, Margaret Whitmore, the iron-willed matriarch who had built a Texas oil empire out of dust and grit. But my father, Robert Whitmore, had other plans. His obsession with bloodlines and legacy led him to disown me in front of my uncles and cousins. He told the room that I had no rightful claim to the Whitmore fortune, that I was nothing more than an outsider. What he didn't know was that his very words, meant to crush me, would become the lever I used to bring his empire of control crashing down. What if the very weapon your enemy uses against you, the words meant to erase you, turns out to be the truth that destroys them instead? The Whitmores weren't just a family. In Houston, they were an institution. Oil wells, refineries, land leases. Margaret's name was stamped on everything from school buildings to hospital wings. To outsiders, we were the perfect dynasty. But behind closed doors, Robert ruled with a steel fist, and every member of the family bowed to his expectations. I never did. I wasn't the daughter who fit neatly into cocktail parties or oil-board luncheons. I was the quiet one, the one who read books under the pecan trees, instead of practicing the social graces Robert demanded, and maybe that's why his words cut so deep. If you've ever been told you don't belong in the very place you've spent your life calling home, you'll understand the way my stomach turned that day. I remember pressing my palms against the mahogany table, trying to anchor myself while cousins smirked and whispered. My younger brothers, Thomas and William, looked away, too afraid of Robert's glare to defend me. Only one person in the room met my eyes. Daniel Whitmore, Robert's younger brother, my uncle. His gaze wasn't mocking, it was pained. That glance stayed with me. Robert thought he had silenced me by branding me a fraud, but that very accusation sparked a fire I didn't know I had. If I wasn't a Whitmore, as he claimed, then who was I, and why did Daniel look like a man swallowing a confession he couldn't voice? That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through the silent halls of the estate, past oil portraits of ancestors whose stern faces seemed to judge me. I paused at my grandmother's portrait, Margaret in her younger days, hair swept up, eyes piercing. I whispered aloud, "Did you know, grandmother? Did you leave something behind for me, or am I really nothing?" The silence was heavy, but I remembered her words from years earlier. Never let Robert decide your worth. He measures people in barrels and dollars, not in heart. Those words became my anchor. The next morning, I arranged to meet Daniel in a quiet cafe off Main Street. I needed answers. He arrived late, his Stetson in hand, eyes shadowed with something I couldn't name. When I confronted him, he didn't deny Robert's claim. Instead, his jaw tightened and he said softly, "Claire, there are truths in this family that were buried deeper than any oil well." My heart thundered. For the first time, I realized Robert's cruelty might not just be cruelty. It might be a cover for a secret that could upend the Whitmore dynasty forever, and I was determined to dig until I struck it. The cafe was quiet, save for the clink of coffee cups and the low hum of country music on the radio. My uncle, Daniel Whitmore, sat across from me, his hat turning slowly in his hands, like a wheel stuck in mud. His eyes wouldn't meet mine, and I could tell he'd rehearsed this moment in his mind 100 times. "Daniel," I said, my voice low but steady, "I need the truth. Why would Robert say I'm not a Whitmore? What is he hiding?" His jaw tightened. For a moment I thought he might stand up and walk out, leaving me with questions gnawing holes in my soul, but then he leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper. "Claire," he said, "family secrets don't stay buried forever, and some truths burn worse than oil fires." I had always believed I was Robert's daughter, the quiet disappointment in his line of heirs. But what Daniel told me that day cracked the foundation of everything I thought I knew about myself, and about the Whitmores. Because the truth wasn't that I wasn't a Whitmore. The truth was that I was more of a Whitmore than Robert ever could be. What if the very blood your father uses to condemn you is the proof that he has no rightful claim to the family legacy he clings to? Daniel's hands shook as he stirred his coffee. "Your grandmother, Margaret, she protected you. She knew Robert Armand. It's pride, his obsession with purity. That's why she made me swear to keep quiet until she was gone." I leaned closer. "Keep quiet about what?" His eyes finally met mine. "Claire, I'm your real father." The cafe around me blurred. I heard the scrape of chairs, the hiss of steam from the espresso machine, but it felt like I was underwater. "What do you mean?" I whispered. Daniel swallowed. "Margaret knew Robert wasn't fit to raise you. He was already cruel, already drowning himself in control and anger. Your mother, rest her soul, turned to me. We kept it hidden to protect you. Margaret backed us, but Robert, he always suspected, and now he's using it to erase you." "I know what you're thinking. Betrayal on betrayal. And you'd be right. I felt like the rug had been yanked from under me. But maybe you've had a moment in your life too, when someone you trusted revealed a truth so big it made you question everything." Part of me wanted to scream, to shove my chair back and storm out of that cafe, but another part of me, the part Robert had tried to crush for years, felt something else. Relief. If Daniel was my father, that meant Robert's words at the will reading weren't the end of me, they were the beginning. Because if I was Daniel's daughter, then I carried Whitmore blood in my veins, true blood, the very thing Robert worshipped. And if that was true, then Robert's whole life was about to unravel. That night, I went back to my apartment in Houston and stared at the old cedar box Margaret had given me on my 21st birthday. She had told me it contained pieces of strength for when I needed them most. Inside were faded photographs, a silver locket, and a sealed envelope with my name on it. My hands shook as I broke the wax seal. Her handwriting curled across the page. "Claire, never forget. Blood is not in names, it is in truth. One day Robert will try to strip you of what is yours. When that day comes, remember who you are, and do not be afraid to fight." I pressed the letter to my chest. She had known. All along, she had known. The next morning, I walked into Bernard Walsh's law office, my grandmother's private attorney, the one man Robert had never fully controlled. Bernard was a wiry old Texan with sharp eyes and a sharper memory. I laid Margaret's letter on his desk and told him everything Daniel had confessed. Bernard listened quietly, then nodded once. "Claire," he said, tapping the letter, "your grandmother anticipated this fight. She left me instructions. If Robert ever questioned your blood, we were to open a sealed record in the county archives, and let me tell you something, Robert might not want that record coming to light." My pulse quickened. Why? Bernard leaned back, a grim smile on his face. "Because if what I suspect is true, Robert isn't even Margaret's real son." The room tilted, and I gripped the edge of his desk. Robert had spent his life obsessed with purity, obsessed with bloodlines, obsessed with cutting me out. But what if the man who condemned me wasn't truly a Whitmore himself? The county clerk's office smelled like dust and paper ink, the kind of place where history isn't just remembered but buried, waiting for someone bold enough to dig it up. Bernard Walsh walked beside me, his cane clicking softly against the tiled floor. My heart hammered in my chest as we approached the archives room. "Claire," Bernard said, lowering his voice, If what your grandmother left here is what I think it is, Robert won't be able to stop you, but once we open this box, there's no going back." I took a deep breath. "Then let's open it." Margaret Whitmore hadn't just written letters of comfort. She'd left evidence that could upend everything Robert believed about himself, about me, and about the empire he guarded like a wolf with blood on its teeth. What happens when the man who spends his whole life protecting his legacy discovers the legacy isn't his to claim in the first place? The clerk, a grey-haired woman with kind eyes, brought out a wooden chest sealed with county wax. Bernard handed her the authorization Margaret had left behind years ago. She glanced at the signature, nodded, and slid the chest across the counter. Inside were yellowed birth records, adoption papers, and a smaller sealed envelope marked, "For Claire, when the truth is needed." My fingers trembled as I tore it open. The first page was a notarized document, proof that Robert Whitmore had been adopted at age 2 from a small orphanage in Dallas. I blinked, reading the words again and again. Adopted. Robert wasn't even Margaret's biological son. Bernard exhaled slowly, just as I suspected. "But then why did Margaret treat him like the heir?" I whispered. Bernard's gaze hardened. "Because Robert demanded it. Margaret never told him the full truth. She believed blood didn't define family, but he twisted that silence into arrogance. I don't know if you've ever had a moment where the enemy's weapon turns back on them, when their greatest strength is suddenly revealed as their greatest weakness. That was this moment for me. For years, Robert had sneered at me, called me unworthy, illegitimate, and all along it was him who had no Whitmore blood. Robert wasn't the Whitmore, I was. Bernard tucked the papers back into the chest and met my eyes. "Claire, this changes everything. With these documents, not only can you claim your place as Margaret's heir, you can dismantle Robert's claim entirely, but you must be careful. Men like him, when cornered, they don't surrender. They destroy." I nodded. "Then we won't corner him yet. We'll let him trap himself." That night I returned to my apartment and spread Margaret's letter, Daniel's confession, and Robert's adoption papers across my kitchen table. The picture was clear now. Robert had built his entire empire on lies. Lies Margaret had tolerated out of mercy. Lies Daniel had hidden out of shame. Lies Robert had weaponized against me. But the time for mercy was over. 2 days later, I attended the Whitmore family board meeting at the downtown Houston Tower. Robert sat at the head of the long oak table, flanked by Thomas and a few cousins who'd always worshipped his authority. He smirked when I walked in, as if daring me to defy him again. "Claire," he drawled, "what a surprise. Thought you'd be too busy sulking to join us." I slid into a chair, keeping my expression calm. "Just here to listen." For an hour, Robert ranted about oil reserves, profits, and future drilling projects, but the whole time my mind buzzed with the papers in my bag, the truth burning like a secret fire. Finally he leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Now, as I said at the will reading, there's no room for pretenders in this family. Claire doesn't carry Whitmore blood, so she's out. End of discussion." I almost laughed. If only he knew. I glanced around the room. Thomas smirked. The cousins nodded. They all believed him. But soon the truth would shatter that smug certainty. Because while Robert thought he was cutting me out, I had the one weapon he couldn't defend against, the truth of who he really was. The boardroom lights reflected off the polished oak table, casting sharp glimmers across Robert's face. He leaned back in his leather chair, every movement dripping arrogance. "Let's vote," he said, waving his hand as if the outcome was already carved in stone. "All in favour of removing Claire from board succession due to lack of Whitmore lineage?" Hands went up. Thomas, the cousins, even 2 long-time executives. My pulse pounded in my ears, but I forced myself to stay perfectly calm. Robert smirked. "There you have it. Unanimous. The line ends with me." I leaned forward, sliding a thick envelope across the table. "Actually, Robert, the line ends with you." The room stilled, his smirk faltered. "What is this?" he demanded. Proof, I said softly, of who really carries Whitmore blood. For years, Robert had built his empire on intimidation and lies, convincing everyone, maybe even himself, that he was the rightful heir. But Margaret hadn't left him the throne. She'd left me the truth. What happens when the man who defines himself by bloodlines discovers he has none? The board members shifted uncomfortably as I pulled out the adoption certificate, notarized and stamped with the county seal. My voice didn't tremble as I read aloud. Robert Whitmore, adopted at age 2 from Dallas Children's Home, legal guardian, Margaret Whitmore. Gasps rippled through the room. Bernard Walsh, sitting quietly at the far end, nodded gravely. It's authentic. I was there when the papers were filed. Robert's face drained of colour. That's a lie, he spat. Forgery. Claire's desperate. I slid Daniel's letter onto the table, and here's the rest. A confession from Daniel Whitmore himself. He and Margaret agreed to raise you as their own, never telling you the truth, out of love. But you used that love as a weapon, against me, against everyone. For the first time in my life, Robert looked small. His hands trembled as he tried to gather the papers. But Bernard snatched them first, holding them high for the room to see. I'd spent a lifetime being told I wasn't enough, not blood enough, not Whitmore enough. But the truth was, the very man who branded me an outsider had never belonged to the family he worshipped. And now the world knew it. Robert Whitmore, I said, my voice clear and sharp, you've spent decades cutting people down for not being pure enough, but it turns out the only imposter in this room is you. The room erupted. Thomas shouted something about conspiracy. The cousins whispered furiously among themselves. One executive slammed his fist on the table. If this is true, Robert has no legal claim to Margaret's shares. They go to the bloodline. And there it was, the shift. The empire Robert had hoarded was slipping through his fingers faster than oil through sand. He lunged across the table toward me, his face red. You think you've won, Claire. You think anyone cares about your papers. I built this company. Me, you're nothing but a parasite clinging to what I made. I stood, steadying myself on the chair. No, Robert, you built nothing. Margaret built it. Daniel built it. And you leached off their name. You were so busy chasing purity that you forgot the only thing that made you Whitmore was Margaret's mercy, and that mercy ends tonight. Bernard raised his cane and tapped the floor. The vote stands, but not the way Robert thinks. With this evidence, the shares revert to Claire Daniels as Margaret's granddaughter and direct heir, effective immediately. Robert's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His eyes darted around the room, searching for allies. None came. One by one, the cousins lowered their gazes. Thomas shifted uncomfortably, realizing the ship was sinking. And Robert? He sat back down, his body shaking, his empire crumbling in real time. I didn't gloat, I didn't raise my voice. I simply gathered the papers, tucked them neatly into my folder, and turned toward the door. As I walked out, I heard Bernard's voice behind me. Gentlemen, let it be recorded, the Whitmore estate passes to Claire Daniels, meeting adjourned. Robert shouted my name, a desperate roar echoing off the boardroom walls. But I didn't turn back. Outside, the Houston air was heavy with late summer heat. I breathed it in, like freedom. Margaret's cabin in the Texas hill country awaited me, the true heart of her legacy. Not the oil wells, not the skyscrapers, not the greed. The cabin she and I had restored together, stone by stone. That was home. That weekend I drove there with Bernard and Laura. We sat on the porch as cicadas buzzed in the pines. Laura poured wine, Bernard told old stories, and I watched the sun dip behind the hills. For the first time in decades, I wasn't haunted by Robert's shadow. I was Margaret's granddaughter, the rightful Whitmore. And I had reclaimed not just an inheritance, but my life.